Welcome everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about an inspector calls. So I'm not going to go through these first few pages because I went through them in the overview video. So if you haven't seen that video, please do that first. I will just point out a few things. So here are the characters. And just a reminder that this bit here means it's referring to the three unities. So the whole play takes place in real time, in the same location, and it's all about one thing, the death of Eva Smith. And it's set in the spring of 1912, just a few weeks before the sinking of the Titanic, which is relevant, and you'll find out why as we go through the play. And just 2 years before the beginning of World War One. And then this here, I won't go through that either, except to remind you of how Priestley gives detailed and extensive stage directions, unlike Shakespeare, for example. The only thing I would point out here is how the lighting is pink and intimate to start with, because they are celebrating Sheila's engagement to Gerald Croft. And then when the inspector arrives, it becomes brighter and harder, like a police cell. Okay, so we're going to dive straight into Act 1. So I've got pictures of Arthur and Sheila there because these are the characters that the inspector interviews first in Act 1. So what I'm going to do is we're going to listen to the audio version a few minutes at a time, and then I will go through the written version. Just a word of warning, the audio version is a little bit different to the written version, okay? But don't worry too much about that. Just listen to the audio version, and then I'll go through the written version and explain the important bits. It's really critical to at least listen to the audio version. I mean, ideally, you should see the play on stage. Yeah, it's a play. That's really, really important point to remember. Be careful of film versions. I'm not saying don't see the films. You can, but film versions are even worse than audio versions in the sense that they do change the play quite a lot. For example, on stage and in the audio version, we never hear from Eva Smith or see her because she's dead, obviously. But in film versions, they often do show Eva Smith quite extensively. Okay, so without further ado, let's start listening to the play.
All right, Edna. Give Mr. Croft the port, will you?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Oh, you'll like this port, Gerald. It's exactly the same as your father gives.
Oh, then it'll be all right. The governor prides himself on being a good judge of port.
Oh, I'm sure he is. Now then, Sybil, you'll take a glass tonight. Special occasion.
Yes, go on, Mummy. You must drink our health.
Very well, just a little.
Allow me.
Thank you, Gerald. All right, Edna, I'll ring from the drawing room when we want coffee.
Yes, ma'am.
Ah, this is very nice. Good dinner too, Sybil. Don't you think so, Gerald?
No, absolutely first class.
Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things.
Come, Sybil, I'm treating Gerald like one of the family. I'm sure he won't object.
Go on, Gerald, but just you object.
Wouldn't dream of it. In fact, I insist on being one of the family now. I've been trying long enough, haven't I?
Except for all last summer when you never came near me.
I was awfully busy at the works all that time.
That's what you say.
Now, Sheila, don't tease him. When you're married, you'll realise that men with important work sometimes need to spend all their time and energy on their business. You'll have to get used to that, just as I had.
I don't believe I will, so you be careful, Gerald.
Oh, I will.
Now then, Eric, what's the joke?
Don't know. Suddenly felt I just had to laugh.
You're squiffy.
I am not. Stop it, you two. Arthur, what about this famous toast of yours?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, Gerald, It's a pity Sir George and Lady Croft can't be with us, but they're abroad.
Okay, so let's just pause there. So, like I say, in the case of Inspector Calls, don't try to follow along the lines too carefully with the audio version. It's actually more confusing. But just listen and then kind of skim through the lines on the page in front of you, and then I will go through them line by line. So, so this page here, we don't need to worry about too much. Priestley is just setting the scene, this family atmosphere. They're having a dinner. They're all very jolly and everything. We don't need to worry about this first page here. So let's get to this page. Now, again, mostly this is, again, just setting the scene. The only thing I will point out, which I also pointed out in the overview video, is this Edna. So Edna is a minor character on the one hand, but remember, she's important indirectly to show that the Berling family are reasonably well off. They are middle class. They can afford a maid, okay? And in fact, they also have a cook. And this line here, this bit, was actually skipped in the audio version. So the cook is actually only mentioned once. Edna appears a few times in the play, but not very often, and she only has one or two lines. Okay, so most of this page as well, we can pretty much ignore. This is where the important lines begin, and this line is actually really, really important. So what's happening here is that Priestley is foreshadowing the fact that what we're going to find out is that Gerald had an affair with Eva Smith last year, and that's why he didn't come anywhere near Sheila. And then he makes this excuse that he was busy at work. I mean, he probably was busy as well, but that wasn't the main reason why he didn't come and see Sheila. It was because he was having an affair with Eva Smith, although he knew her as Daisy Renton. So I've talked about the names, and I'll mention that more as we go through the play as well. And then this line here, so remember, so these are stage directions, as you obviously, as you know, and we know that Priestley does give detailed stage directions. And in your essays, you are allowed to refer to stage directions. In fact, you should, okay, if they're important, if they're relevant. So this is important. Why do you think this is important? What impression do you get about Eric from this? So it's important because it shows that Eric is young, he's immature, he laughs for no reason. We don't know why he's laughing here. It might be to do with what Gerald is saying about being busy at work. Now we're going to learn that Eric also had an affair with Daisy Renton or Eva Smith, and he's lied. He hasn't told anybody about it either. So he, as a man, as a fellow man, he kind of knows the stories that people tell. I mean, he doesn't know about Gerald and the affair, but anyway, the main point is the impression we get of this young, immature man or boy almost, really. Okay, and then squiffy means slightly drunk, and actually that's important. So later on, we're going to find that Eric is basically an alcoholic, which at his age is quite concerning, but the parents don't know anything about it. So on the one hand, we're getting this image, initial image of this close and happy family, but we're going to find out actually that they don't really know much about each other at all. Okay, so, and then on the one hand, these lines here, when she says Squiffy, and Mrs. Burling says, what an expression. I mean, on the surface, you might think, oh, that's not very important. And it's not, but there is a hint here of how people are changing, yeah, how the young people are changing, and obviously the World War is going to, and how women are changing and saying things that maybe they shouldn't say. And some of the things that Sheila says to Gerald, again, probably even a few years before that, women wouldn't have spoken to men in that manner. Okay, and then he says, oh, this line here means that when Sheila says squiffy, he's saying, well, she says much worse than that. But anyway, I mean, but this is just siblings kind of teasing each other. Okay, so we don't want to read too much into it, but we are getting a good picture of these characters and their relationships, which is the whole point that Priestley is trying to achieve at this early stage of the play. Okay, so this is where we left off. So let's now go back to the audio version and listen to a bit more.
So it can't be helped. I tell you frankly that your engagement to Sheila means a tremendous lot to me. You're just the kind of son-in-law I always wanted. Your father and I have been friendly rivals in business for some time, and now you've brought us together. Perhaps we may look forward to the time when Crofts Limited and Burling and Company are no longer competing, but working together for lower costs and higher prices.
Here.
Now, Arthur, I don't think you ought to talk business on an occasion like this.
Neither do I. All wrong.
I only mentioned it in passing. What I did want to say was that Sheila's a lucky girl. And I think you're a pretty fortunate young man too, Gerald.
I know I am.
So here's wishing the pair of you the very best that life can bring. Gerald and Sheila.
Yes, Gerald, Sheila, darling. Our congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Eric?
Yes, all the best. She's got a temper sometimes, but she's not bad, really. Good old Sheila.
Chump. I can't drink to this, can I? When do I drink?
You can drink to me.
All right, then. I drink to you, Gerald.
Thank you. And I drink to you. I hope I can make you as happy as you deserve to be. And I'll start with this.
What is it?
As if you didn't know.
Open it.
Oh, Gerald, it's wonderful. Look, Mummy, it's the ring I told you about. Isn't it a beauty? Oh, darling. Mwah.
Steady, you two.
Now I really feel engaged.
So you ought, darling. It's a lovely ring. Be careful with it.
Careful. I'll never let it out of my sight.
And now, Arthur, I think Sheila and I had better go into the drawing room and leave you men.
No, before you go, I just want to say this.
Okay, so we'll just pause there for a minute and let's go back to where we were, which was here. So these lines are quite important because notice what's happening here. So Gerald's parents are not here. Now, they have notified the Birding family and they do have an excuse, but it's still a bit strange, really, because surely the party could have been delayed or some arrangement could have been made. It's an engagement party. It's quite important. And really, both sets of parents should be here. Now, Dickens doesn't, Priestley doesn't explain exactly why, but what we can infer is that we know that the Crofts are higher class than the Burlings, okay? So Sheila is marrying up, although Mrs. Burling had married down when she married Arthur Burling. And the main point here is that class structure is a really big theme of this play. So class at that time was really, really important. So the fact that the Croft parents aren't here, it's a bit of a snub. It's a bit rude to the Burlings. But Mr. Burling and the family are not taking it as rudeness, they're accepting it. And then he says that speech making is a bit more difficult. But then Eric interrupts him, says, well, don't do it then. So again, in itself, it's not that big a deal. And nowadays we might think nothing of it, right? But at that time, for the son to interrupt the father like that would have been considered quite rude. Until recently, children used to call their father sir, and the rule was that children were heard but not seen. They were meant to keep quiet unless they were spoken to by parents or by adults in general, for that matter. Okay, so this speech here is quite important. I mean, the first bit here, you can kind of ignore, it's just normal chit chat. By all means, pause these videos and read through these lines. You should do that. But I'm just pointing out the important lines. So these are the important lines here, these ones, from there to there. So notice they were rivals in business. So rivals means competing. And so you can see here that obviously part of the goal of this engagement is it is partly to do with business, okay? And Crofts Limited are both older and bigger, so not they're not just upper class, higher class than the Burlings, but also the Burlings are marrying up in terms of business as well. And then this quote here, this phrase here is really important. So lower costs and higher prices. So this is the next main theme of socialism and capitalism. And the whole point of capitalism is to lower its costs and increase its prices so that overall you're making as much profit as possible. And what do you think is the biggest cost for a business? It's people, it's the employees. The salaries and wages of people are the main cost of a business. So that's the main thing, that's the main cost that any business wants to reduce. And that's obviously going to be critical to the story meet, as we find out what happened to Eva Smith. Okay, and the rest is again just normal chit chat. We can skip to the next page. And this page actually we can skip as well, except so this line here again is just Sheila and Eric being normal siblings teasing each other. Okay, so we don't need to worry too much about this page here. Okay, so this page is really important, or at least some of the lines are. So this is fairly straightforward, but then he produces a ring case, so he's going to officially propose. I mean, they know what's going to happen, but he's officially proposing. Now, this line is really important, and it's really strange that the audio version skipped it. But remember, the audio version is a modern version, and the director will have chosen the lines to suit his purpose. Okay, so that's why he or she may have skip these lines, but this is really important here. Look, is it the one you wanted me to have? She says. So Sheila is saying to Gerald, is this the ring you wanted me to have? What's weird about that? Pause the video and think about that. Well, it's really strange. Surely it should be the ring that she wanted to have, not the one he wanted her to have. So again, this theme of gender roles, of men being superior, of knowing best, and kind of telling the women what to do and what's best for them. Okay. And then these lines are not that important, except so she kisses Gerald hastily, quickly, and he says, "Steady the bath." So this is an old phrase. You don't need to worry too much about it. But he's just saying, "Oh, watch out." So I mean, not that important, but slight something we can say here, which is that I mean, nowadays, if they were to kiss, nobody would even mention it. And to be fair, they are kissing, so it's not like in those days people didn't show any affection to each other in public. They did, and you can see it there. But he kind of says, "Oh, steady on." Okay, so we can now skip to the next slide. Okay, so here's another line. What do you think is important about this line? How is this different to the way people would behave at a dinner party today? So this is really interesting, isn't it? So she's saying, "Oh, let's go to the drawing room, like a sitting room, and leave you men." So they do have dinner together. So there's no like actual segregation, separation. But after dinner, men and women would often do this. The men would go to one room, and the women would go to another. Okay, so I mean, we don't need to say too much about that. But again, this idea of gender roles and how society was slightly different back then to the way it is now. And then this bit is important. So notice how Berling makes these big speeches. Everybody else just has one or two lines, but Berling is the one who makes these big speeches. And this goes back to that word portentous. So somebody who's, so we get this picture of this. So portentous means pompous, somebody who's full of themselves, who think they know everything. But actually, we're going to learn from his speeches that he's a bit of an idiot, really. He says things about the future which the audience at that time, sorry, the audience would know are false. So remember, the play is set in 1912, a few weeks before the Titanic sinking, 2 years before the war. So, but the play was written in 1945, okay, and performed in 45, 46. So at that time, when they heard Berling, he's going to predict that the Titanic will never sink, there'll be no war, and of course the audience knows that the Titanic is going to sink just a few weeks later after the play is set. They know about the war, so he comes across as a really kind of foolish man, really, albeit he's a good businessman. And notice that although he's of a lower class than Gerald, he is older, and obviously he's a father. So Gerald does listen to him politely, as you would expect from somebody younger. Okay, but we actually stopped the audio version here, so now let's look a bit more of let's listen a bit more before we carry on looking at the written version.
I'm delighted about this engagement. I hope it won't be too long before you're married. It's a very good time for it. And soon, it'll be an even better time. There's a lot of silly pessimistic talk about possible labour trouble in the near future, and I speak as a hard-headed businessman who has to take risks and know what he's about. I say, you can ignore all this wild talk. We've passed the worst of it. We employers are coming together at last to see that our interests and the interests of capital are properly protected. We're in for a time of steadily increasing prosperity.
I believe you're right, sir.
Now, you three young people, remember what I'm telling you now. In 20 or 30 years' time, you may be giving a little party like this. Your son or daughter might be getting engaged. And I tell you, by then, you'll be living in a world that'll have forgotten all these capital versus labour agitations. There'll be peace and prosperity and rapid progress everywhere.
Now,
I know, my dear, I know I'm talking too much. But you youngsters remember what I said. We hard-headed, practical businessmen must say something sometime. And we don't guess. We've had experience, and we know.
Arthur.
Oh, all right, Sybil.
Thank you, dear. Don't keep Gerald in here.
Okay, so you may have noticed there that the audio version is quite different to the written version. So let's just go back and go through it. So I got to this point here. So let's carry on to the next page. Right, so here's the first example of how everything he says is going to turn out to be wrong. So the audience will know that a few years after this, in 1926, there was a general strike. So there were lots of strikes in those days. So everything he's saying about striking is wrong. Another important quote you can learn is this one here, the interest of capital. So again, the theme of socialism versus capitalism, which we'll talk more about separately in a separate video as well. You can make a note of that, a mental note. And then, of course, here he's talking about the war, saying there's not going to be a war. And guess what? 2 years later, there is a war. I mean, this line here is certainly true. Nobody really loses. Nobody really gains by war, but it doesn't seem to stop people wanting to go to war for some strange reason. Okay, so let's move on to the next page. So this speech here is really important, okay? Uh, these are quotes you can learn. Hard-headed, practical man of business, isn't a chance of war. I mean, some of these things he's saying are perfectly true, but look at this, the Titanic. So you can stop the video and read through this slowly if you want. Unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. And a few weeks later, guess what? It sinks. Okay, so you might want to just stop this video. And I mean, this is all just him talking as a father. That's fair enough. Blah, blah, blah. Capital versus labor agitations. What theme is that? Capitalism versus socialism. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video here. So really important speech. Just read through it slowly and pick out those quotes, but I'll pick those out for you in the summary sections of these videos of this course. So we'll stop there. So just a final reminder that the audio version is quite different. So especially this bit here, notice that it cut out quite a lot and also mixed up some of these speeches, okay? So please don't worry too much about that. Just listen to the video, get a feel for it, listen to the main important bits, and then just wait for me to go through the written version and explain to you the important bits. Okay, so I'm just going to skip to this last slide here. As always, if you found this video useful, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And I'll see you in the next video when we'll carry on with Act 1.